Hi, I'm Peter, founder of Healthy Working Life. Purpose of this video today is to talk about Qigong-based health and wellbeing workshops. And I'm going to be answering a few of the questions which have arisen in relation to Qigong and the nature of these workshops. Over the last few weeks, people have asked me a few questions. So there are a number of different elements or streams to my business, one of which is health and wellbeing workshops, and that's going to be the focus of this talk today. So the topics. The first one, what is Qigong? I'm then going to give a bit of a description of my background and discuss why I believe Qigong is such a good foundation for health and wellbeing. I look at why it's of relevance to not just our work lives, but our personal lives as well, which of course are intimately related. And one of the other key things I do is I discuss why Qigong-based workshops are so useful for the neurodiversity context, for neurodivergent people. And then I finish off with a quick look at what can actually be achieved in a single workshop and why it's advantageous to do something like that rather than just purely going to a gym or reading a book. So the first question, what is Qigong? So I've been immersed in the world of Qigong, Tai Chi, Bagua, various Taoist martial arts for about 40 years now. So every now and again it surprises me when people ask me, what is it? What is Qigong? Because I'm so used to it. And so I'm doing this video to discuss that. Many more people have probably heard of Tai Chi. And you see sort of pictures of people, particularly in China, doing Tai Chi forms under trees in parks. Now, our mind, our emotions, our body, our spirit are naturally fully integrated. I'm actually going to introduce another term, Neigong, which is even less well known than Qigong. But Neigong practice helps us to rebalance and reintegrate all aspects of ourselves. So Neigong can be valuable as a healing practice, but also as a preventative practice. So it promotes better resilience and general well-being. I don't have it here, but the book, Opening the Energy Gates of the Body. I'm going to give a quick quote from this book by Bruce Frantzis. In China for millennia, the full potential of Qigong for the mind, body and spirit has been realized through the practices of Neigong. So I'm going to be talking about Neigong and Qigong as a basis for Western workshops. The health and wellbeing workshops that I run are designed around core Neigong and Qigong principles. So those principles underpin a healthy and safe Qigong and Tai Chi practice. So that's been part of the criteria I've used for actually selecting appropriate exercises. I try and ensure that everything I teach is safe for absolutely anyone to do, and anyone can get the benefit from the techniques. So the techniques taught in the workshops are based upon a 3,000-year-old Chinese system of self-healing. And it's one that's, this system is designed to deliver significant physical and mental benefits. It's evolved over a very long period of time and has demonstrated its true value. So most of the techniques I teach are based upon the Taoist water tradition. So I studied the water tradition, other people have studied fire-based systems, so there's different elements. My favourite has always been the water-based systems. So these emphasise efforts without force, relaxation, letting go, and allowing tension and blocks to be eroded in a similar way to the way that water can erode rocks. So as per slide on the screen, I'm going to talk a bit about the translation and pronunciation. So Qigong which I have to admit I'm not Chinese, and I've never really studied Chinese properly, so I do apologise for my pronunciation. But Qigong, the way it's written, and you see it is a Romanized linguistic representation of a Chinese term. Now there are several different Romanized versions of Chinese language forms. So I always used to use the Yale system, Qigong, Chigung, for this purpose today. And a lot of the time when I, in marketing materials, I use the Qigong, what's called the Pinyin system. When I studied the I Ching, the Book of Changes, I used to use a translation which was based upon the Giles system. So there are lots of different variations and forms you may see in terms of spelling. And I also want to just point out that obviously it's not just a linguistic translation, it's actually a cultural translation. So the Qigong techniques I teach are from a fundamentally different culture, the Chinese culture. But I'll come on to that more a bit later. So in terms of Tai Chi, some people will have seen footage or maybe photos of people in China practicing forms, quite often Yang style, sometimes Wu style, which I do, various forms underneath trees in the early morning. And the idea is you get qi that drips from trees and helps to restore, replenish, and build your own energy for your training. Now, many people in China commence their study of Qigong, Tai Chi, when they reach their 50s or 60s, as they start to become aware that the level of energy and their general health that they've taken for granted for many years, suddenly they're starting to notice it's a bit depleted compared to where it used to be. So that's when many people start to study these techniques. Now, here, the picture there, you've got Bruce Frantzis on the right, who I have studied with him in both in London when he's come to London. He's a Californian, so I've also studied with him in typically San Francisco. And this other picture shows him in younger years with Liu Hongtie. Again, apologies if my pronunciation isn't perfect. But he was the master, and he was a lineage holder who actually taught, in fact, the full system, which is quite rare. So, adaptation of Chinese practices. So Bruce Frantzis, an American, travelled the world, and then he learned Chinese so he could actually not just speak Chinese but think in Chinese, which is actually quite important to understand when you're learning from somebody who is completely Chinese. So he studied with Taoist lineage master Liu Hongtie for many years. And then Bruce has spent many years adapting these basically ancient Chinese practices for the Western markets, the Western mindset. And he actually had Liu's blessing, which is quite unusual. Very few Chinese masters traditionally even would pass on the full system to other Chinese people, let alone a Westerner. It just wasn't done. But for various reasons, which are actually discussed in the book I mentioned earlier by Bruce Frantzis, he actually taught the full system to Bruce. My aim with these workshops and the use of Qigong is to faithfully transmit and utilise and teach the core principles in a way that actually allows ordinary, everyday people to live and work healthily and sustainably. So, I'm now going to move on to a bit of personal history, which the history as I describe it basically explains why I basically know that this material actually works, it's of value. I'm going to take you back to the late 1980s. So I started work in 1987, and around about the same time I started studying Yang-style Tai Chi. I enjoyed it, and I studied it quite a bit, and then I began to co-teach. There was an elderly lady who was already 70 when I met her, and she was teaching the same style, Yang style Tai Chi system that I'd learned. And so we began to actually co-teach that, Tai Chi and Qigong. But then in the 1990s, in the mid-1990s, I started to become ill. And I traced this to stress at work. Now, I found this strange because I'd read and heard all about these amazing health benefits from Tai Chi and Qigong, and I thought, yeah, I'll be fine. I'm not going to get stressed. I'm not going to become ill. And yet here I was becoming ill. So I was a member of my employer's private healthcare plan. So I began having various tests to try and understand what was wrong. The results were inconclusive. So at this point, I decided to seek out a new teacher. And I basically stopped everything I was doing in relation to my Tai Chi Qigong studies, and I started as a beginner again, a beginner student of Chris Ray Chappell. And there's a picture of Chris in the second studio, I think it would have been, that we trained him in the 1990s. Obviously in the early days, a few years ago now, so both of us look a wee bit older and are used to that stage. So in terms of the results of that training and the lessons I learned from this, 6 weeks after I started studying with Chris, my health had been fully restored. Now, I found this quite mind-blowing, to be honest, that in such a short space of time, I could go from being ill to the extent where I was having to take time off work and I couldn't focus, I couldn't function, I was physically unwell, and suddenly my physical well-being, my mental well-being, my emotional state, everything was absolutely fine again. Going back to the early years of my career, when I used to, at that point, when I first started, I used to love my work and I was really healthy and it was all great. So to suddenly, within 6 weeks, to be restored to that state is amazing. So this was one of the first important lessons I learned. Just because something's called Tai Chi, Qigong, just because you can study with someone, and just because it looks like somebody's moving in a way that appears to, it can look good, it can be well choreographed, but you don't necessarily get the health benefits from it. So the lineage and understanding the source of the material that's taught is actually quite important. So Chris was teaching me the Qigong and Wu style Tai Chi that he'd learned via Bruce Frantzis, who I've already mentioned. And as I say, I learned fairly quickly that it actually works. Now, I was actually studying with Chris. Initially, it was about 6 hours a week of classes, and then I moved fairly quickly to about 9 hours of classes per week. Plus, I did weekend workshops, and I did this week in, week out, year in, year out for quite a long time. So I studied with Chris, and as I mentioned earlier, I also I was lucky to actually train with Bruce when he came to London, and also I spent some time out in San Francisco to study various elements of Qigong and Tai Chi and Bagua. So in the late 1990s, I had fellow students who were, they worked in the City of London, and they themselves could occasionally get stressed, and they really relied upon the Qigong and Tai Chi classes that we did. But their colleagues at work were burning out. And when I say burning out, they literally lost feeling in whole swathes of their spines. The nerves just completely died, and they couldn't focus for more than about 20 or 30 seconds. And therefore, even though they'd been earning £1 million a year in their nice city job, they suddenly found that they were completely unable to work and unable to earn money, which didn't really make sense to me. So one of the things I considered was, how do you actually take these powerful techniques, Qigong, Tai Chi, into the workplace? And I was quite surprised by the reaction of some fellow students who worked in the city. They said, I'm not going to contaminate all this great work by a horrific workplace, which I thought wasn't really what I was wanting to hear, really. What I did over the next 25 years was I did a load of research into how can you actually maintain a healthy working style, how can you actually work sustainably, happily, healthily for years and decades, basically. And over a 25-year period, I first of all developed a framework, and there's a model of sort of a fairly straightforward model of that framework there, which begins with awareness, goes around by causes and effects, resilience, all the way through to review and obstacles. So there are a lot of different components, but I found that every single one of these components of this framework need to be addressed in order to be able to actually work sustainably and healthily and maintain a healthy lifestyle. So there was the framework, and then there was the methodology as well, which you go into several years to sort of, in terms of how to actually implement this in a way that allows you not to burn out. So in terms of applying this sustainable working framework, I realised very early on that having really good Qigong-based techniques in workshops or whatever was important, really useful, and can help to build and maintain resilience, which is one of the layers or the components of the framework, and be able to maintain resilience and continue to work in the face of sometimes a very stressful work environment. However, I realised very early on that it's basically insane to just build resilience and leave in place stressful, flawed, unhealthy and basically stupid ways of working. So that's where the framework and the methodology fit in. They provide a systematic means of identifying and addressing those unhealthy working practices, whether those unhealthy practices could be at the organisational, team or individual level. So how do these health and wellbeing workshops fit in to the framework and this methodology? So as I've already indicated, these Qigong-based workshops can help enhance resilience. So the workshops are designed to help you build a toolkit of techniques that you can apply to help prevent or mitigate the risks of stress in the workplace and help prevent illness. The next bit, as well as just building resilience, is it helps to build awareness. Awareness within ourselves, greater awareness of our environment, and the ability to understand, in a way to build a baseline, to understand what it's like when you're okay, and to be able to detect more readily, actually, no, I'm not okay. Am I actually breathing well? Am I holding my breath, which is something I used to do a lot. I used to work a lot with computers of all sorts. So I had a variety of IT roles. And a lot of the time I'd be working a lot in an area which meant you get right up into your head and you don't actually stay in touch with your body. You're not grounded. And that can lead to ill health. So greater awareness as to how you are internally as well as externally, greater resilience. And the other bit is understanding personal obstacles. Are there actually personal factors as to how you operate, how you work, or patterns which are unhealthy for you in terms of your life, various things you do or don't do which tend to cause problems health-wise. It also helps tackle those obstacles to good, sustainable health. So this is just having a quick look at the things typically covered in workshops. So I mentioned mindful Qigong practice. So the mind is actually important. It's actually a key important part of the practice. How you actually focus. Typically you learn with your eyes closed to reduce distraction, but then you learn to have your eyes open so you can actually dissolve out tension, not just in the eyes, but effectively in your environment. People talk about mindfulness. It crops up a lot. In a way, this 3,000-year-old system was an original version of mindfulness. Healthy breathing, I've mentioned. Sitting and standing alignment. So a lot of the work in the workshops we stand for. Some people can't actually, for various health reasons, necessarily stand for too long, in which case they can sit down. As I move more into the work context, I talk more about how to actually align. I'll sit up properly myself now. How to align while sitting, so you can actually help maintain posture and allow your organ space to be able to be healthy rather than collapsed and crushed. So how do you actually maintain a healthy posture? How do you move healthily? I talk about things like the 70% rule, which is rather contradictory to a rather Western, I'm going to work at 100% of my capability, my capacity, and people are expected to work at 100%, but you can't. 70% rule, basically, if you look at the healthy Chinese systems, you find 100%, you back off to 70%, you train at 70% of your capacity, and you get far better results and more sustainable and faster growth, and in fact, and faster progress through not trying to force yourself to work at 100%. And then typically I'll work through an exercise such as cloud hands, which in fact is a very powerful Neigong system, which actually, it includes Tai Chi's basic twisting, turning, bending and stretching motions. So a good Tai Chi form really exercises every aspect of the body. And cloud hands as a Neigong exercise puts everything together, what we learn in workshops, and helps you to actually practice it. And it's a way to really get the benefits quite quickly. Now, next I'm going to talk about is the variations of the health and wellbeing workshops. So in many ways, I've been talking here about a general Qigong health and wellbeing workshop, which is independent of environment in terms of it's not work specific. But ultimately, it's still you as a human being, the same human being who is there in your personal life and your work life. So in fact, my recommended training path is to actually do the general one first and then attend effectively a follow-up workshop, which looks at how to apply these Qigong systems, these practices, these techniques in a work context, because obviously there's some work environments in which you can't necessarily obviously stand there in the work room in the middle of an office, an open plan office, doing practicing cloud hands. In some places I have actually worked in environments where there are actually spaces dedicated where you can actually do Tai Chi forms or where you can practice standing. You can actually do that. And there are many different work contexts. So I do run work-specific versions of Qigong workshops in order to discuss in pragmatic terms how you can actually apply the techniques in various work contexts. Now, a third variant is one for neurodivergent people, so people autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, whatever. So there's a variety of neurodivergent conditions, and so a core part of my business nowadays is neurodiversity. And a variant of the workshops I've created is specifically for people who are neurodivergent. Now, what I've got here is an updated model which shows a direct connection between health and wellbeing workshops and the neurodiversity training that I run, because health and wellbeing obviously is quite important for neurodivergent people in the same way as anyone of any type, any neurological type. But there's quite a high prevalence of additional challenges, including health challenges, things like ability to focus, memory, all sorts of things that you potentially have additional challenges. And I've basically worked on a variant of the health and wellbeing workshop, still Qigong based, but which is specifically designed for people who are autistic, ADHD, whatever. So in a way, sort of just finishing, rolling forward my history. It was in 1920, not in 1922, I'm not quite that old, 2022, so I was formally diagnosed as autistic with ADHD, or what many people now in social media in various places, they use AUDHD. So I do identify as AUDHD. So since 2022, I've been working on integrating neurodiversity into the healthy working business. So it's taken a couple of years to really stabilise that. But an important thing to notice here, given that I'm talking about the health and wellbeing workshops, is that most of my time over 30 to 40 years of studying Qigong, Tai Chi and so on, I was undiagnosed AUDHD, so I didn't actually know about that. So if you consider that I'm AUDHD, I've also got alexithymia, which it's sometimes called emotional blindness, but it's the ability to have internal awareness. I'm also dyspraxic, which means I struggle with balance, with my awareness of my physical environment, things like that. So I'm now going to list some of the advantages or some of the benefits I've received from my study of Qigong, Tai Chi, Bagua. They help me to increase my degree of awareness, internally and externally, and made a massive difference, so I can actually feel and understand a lot better what's actually happening internally. I have a significantly enhanced ability to maintain a relaxed, focused state of attention in all sorts of different environments, and I can dissolve out all sorts of distractions and various things. I've learned ways of helping to regulate my emotional state, which is quite important given that both autism, ADHD, often there are struggles around emotional regulation. I've enhanced my ability to balance physically. So I know many forms, and again recently I was doing class in which there's quite a lot of time just spent balancing on one leg. And you've got one leg in the air and you're moving around, so you've got 100% weight down one leg and you're not falling over. Naturally, I didn't have that balance, so I've developed that balance. So in other words, there's a colossal value to these systems and Qigong-based work for somebody who's neurodivergent. So as I say, that developing a workshop specifically which is accessible for and gives the benefits of Qigong to a neurodivergent audience is an obvious step. So that's why I've created this variation of the course. The potential benefits are colossal, and my interest in these workshops is to actually deliver the same health benefits and wellbeing benefits. So I've designed workshops for everyone, but enable anyone, whoever they are, no matter their neurological type, to get those benefits. So this workshop or this suite of workshops fit nicely into the overall service portfolio, part of the accessibility by design system, which I'm rolling out. Even though I've talked about studying for 10 more hours a week, sometimes in terms of actual classes plus personal practice, what can you achieve in a 2 or 3 hour workshop? Well, as I say, Bruce did some work anyway to actually start to adapt Qigong and these Chinese health systems to a Western market, where generally, and as time goes on, it becomes more and more extreme in terms of limited ability to focus and concentrate and take in information. What I've done is I've really tried to capture the absolute core principles that really make a difference and which really deliver the core benefits. And the workshops are designed to allow in a balanced way for everyone to get sufficient experience to actually feel what it's like and just begin to start to identify, okay, this is what it's like to actually breathe healthily. This is what it's like if I've got a decent posture. This is how to move. I teach core principles about how to align the knees and the feet. So if you're in fact going to a gym as well, you can remember those so you don't actually destroy joints by abusing the body. So I can teach various core principles which lie at the heart or form a foundation for these really healthy practices. And then as I do further workshops, I can build upon that. But I always try and create a workshop where everybody can walk away from that workshop thinking, I've learned something useful. I've learned something more about myself. I'm building a really useful toolkit which I can apply in my home life and in my work life. The final point really, so why not just go to a gym? Great, go to a gym. I've been to a gym myself. And I do classes, I occasionally use equipment and so on. So it's important to be able to know how to use equipment well, and most good gyms will actually have personal trainers or people who can actually help make sure you use equipment well. There are risks. So one of the things that was obvious in when I was training basically in the City of London, you had people who get really, really stressed and really tense. And then they'd go to a gym and they'd sit there and they'd do weight training and they're wiring intention. They're actually wiring stress and a negative stressed state into their bodies through their weight training. So it can be good to understand how to get a good healthy balance, how and when to use what particular training styles. But what I'm doing is not designed to replace everything else you could possibly do. It's something which is designed to work with everything you're doing already, identify gaps in what you're doing in terms of your health and well-being, and what works for you and what doesn't, and provide something that genuinely works for you personally. So that's basically it. I've talked about quite a bit here. Hopefully you've got a better idea as to what Qigong actually is, something about my history, as to why I've studied all of this for many, many years, the value that I've got from it, and hopefully you'll understand why it is I've put so much time and effort into working out how to incorporate this into a broader system, enabling healthy living, healthy working, and sustainable working. So you can actually genuinely enjoy your work and be fulfilled and do a good job that you enjoy. So that's it for today. If you do have questions, I do provide my contact details. I'm perfectly happy to receive emails or questions via the contact form on the website or whatever. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Cheers. Bye.